She was the perfect invisible wife. The one who organized his dinners, picked up his dry cleaning, and smiled politely at parties she was never truly invited to. And when he handed her the divorce papers, she did that quietly too. She signed her name, handed back the ring, and walked away with nothing. Her ex-husband Julian Vance and his new socialite fiancée laughed. They were hosting the biggest charity gala of the year, celebrating their new life. But as the New York elite gathered, a sound shattered the polite chatter. It was the roar of a private jet. And when the doors of the limousine opened, the woman who stepped out was Alara. And she didn't just arrive. She arrived to end him. The law office of Blackwood, Thorne and Associates was a monument to quiet, expensive power. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, the air smelled of old leather and faint, cheap lemon polish. The only sound in Conference Room B was the impatient tap-tap-tap of Julian Vance's solid gold Mont Blanc pen against the polished oak table. Alara. Are we doing this? Julian sighed, not with malice, but with the bone-deep impatience of a man swatting at a fly. He loosened his Brioni silk tie. I have a board meeting at 4. And Chloe? Well, Chloe is waiting. Alara Vance sat opposite him, perfectly unnervingly still. She was as she had been for their entire 6-year marriage, forgettable. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple twist. Her beige knit dress was expensive. Julian assumed he paid the bills, but it had all the flair of a damp tea towel. She looked like a librarian, not the wife of Julian Vance, the rising star of Vance Pharma. The terms are, as you can see, exceptionally generous, Julian's lawyer, a shark named Marcus, droned on. Julian is prepared to offer a one-time severance of... He named a figure that was to Julian a rounding error, but to a woman with no job and no family should have been a lifeline. Julian watched her. He was expecting tears. He had braced himself for screaming for the messy, predictable hysterics of a woman scorned. He had, after all, been publicly parading his new fiancée, Chloe Sterling, for 3 months. The divorce was a simple formality, a cleanup. Alara didn't look at the number. She simply picked up the pen, a cheap office bic, not his Mont Blanc, and moved the signature page toward her. Alara, wait. Julian said, a flicker of something annoyance, guilt stirring in him. Don't you want to read it? Or have your... well, someone look it over? He'd been shocked to learn she hadn't hired her own counsel. It was pathetic, really. Is it fair, Julian? She asked. Her voice was the first thing he'd heard from her in an hour. It was low and clear with no tremor. Julian almost laughed. Fair. Alara, this is more than fair. It's a gift. Be practical. You have no career. Your art history degree is a piece of paper. This sets you up. You can get a nice apartment, maybe. I don't know, teach. You'll be fine. He was already thinking of the Vance Foundation Heart Ball tonight. It was his night. His coronation with Chloe on his arm. The press was waiting. This was the last piece of old business. Alara looked at him, not at his expensive suit or his perfectly coiffed hair. She looked at him into his eyes, and for the first time Julian felt a cold spike of nothing. Not fear, just cold. Her eyes, which he'd always thought were a dull, mousy brown, seemed dark, bottomless. No, thank you, Julian, she said softly. Marcus, the lawyer, froze. I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. You're contesting. I'm not contesting. Alara slid the signature page back. I'm refusing the settlement. Julian stared. You're... What, Alara? Don't be a fool. You can't get more. This is it. Take the money, or you'll be left with nothing. I am already left with nothing, she said. She picked up the pen and with a steady, fluid hand signed her name, Alara Hayes Vance. Then she did 2 things. First, she slid her wedding ring off her finger. It wasn't the large diamond he'd first given her she'd claimed to have lost that years ago, another example of her carelessness. It was a simple, thin gold band she'd worn in its place. She placed it on top of the signed papers. Second, she reached into her simple leather purse and pulled out a single heavy object, a large antique skeleton key attached to a worn velvet fob. She placed it next to the ring. Julian didn't recognize it. "What's this?" "You were always so curious about the one locked drawer in my desk," she said. "The one in the library." "This is the key. It's open now. You can have the contents." She stood up. Her beige dress fell in neat, unremarkable lines. "That's it," Julian said, bewildered. This was too easy. The anticlimax was almost insulting. "That's it." She walked to the door. "Alara!" he called out, standing up. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to stop her. "Where will you go? What will you do?" Alara paused, her hand on the heavy brass handle. She looked back over her shoulder, and the light from the hallway caught her face. She was not smiling. It was something else. "I wish you the life you deserve, Julian," she said. And then she was gone. Julian stared at the closed door. He let out a shaky breath, then laughed. He felt light, free. He pocketed the strange key, already imagining Chloe's delight. "Well," said Marcus, gathering the papers, "that was the easiest high-asset divorce I've ever seen. She's a fool." "She is," Julian agreed, straightening his tie. "She's a fool." He left the office, stepping into his waiting Bentley, his mind already on the gala. He completely forgot about the woman who had just walked out onto the pavement with nothing but the purse on her shoulder. Alara stepped onto the bustling street. The noise of Manhattan washed over her. She walked 2 blocks, her sensible heels clicking, until a black, unmarked Maybach sedan pulled silently to the curb. A man in a dark suit stepped out and opened the rear door. Alara slid inside. The interior was silent, a tomb of plush leather and soundproof glass. "Is it done?" Madam, the driver asked, his voice clipped with a Swiss-German accent. Alara pulled the elastic from her hair, letting the long chestnut waves tumble down. She closed her eyes for a single moment, shedding the skin of Alara Vance. "It is done, Henrik," she said. She pulled out a small encrypted satellite phone. She typed a single 3-word text to a number saved as Astrius. "It is done." The car pulled seamlessly into traffic, heading not toward a sad rented apartment, but toward the private executive heliport on the Hudson River. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of light against the deepening twilight. The great hall home to the Temple of Dender had been transformed for the 45th annual Vance Foundation Heart Ball. It was the crowning jewel of New York high society, and tonight it was Julian Vance's coming-out party as the new patriarch of his family's dynasty. Julian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his hand possessively on the bare back of Chloe Sterling. Chloe was everything Alara was not: loud, dazzling, and utterly shameless. She was draped in a crimson Bottega Veneta gown that seemed glued to her surgically enhanced curves, and around her neck, blazing like a car headlamp, was the Vance sapphire. It was a 60-carat monstrosity that Alara had refused to wear, calling it gaudy and costume-like. She had kept it in the back of the safe. Chloe, upon finding it, had shrieked with a delight so primal Julian had been almost frightened. "Darling, look, it's the Van Asters," Chloe whispered, her voice a theatrical rasp. "And oh my God, is that a reporter from Vogue?" "Julian, they're all here for us." Julian smiled, a tight proprietary smile. "They are here for the hospital wing, my dear. We're funding the new pediatric cardiology unit." "We are." He was on top of the world. The divorce was finalized. The Alara problem was solved. He'd even out of curiosity gone to her desk. The locked drawer contained only a stack of old leather-bound journals filled with unreadable, cramped script in what looked like Dutch and a single dried flower. He'd thrown it all in the trash. Useless. The hall was buzzing. The gossip he knew was about him. "Can you believe it? Signed the papers this morning. Left her with nothing, I heard. She didn't even fight. Poor sad Alara. She was never cut out for this world. Julian upgraded. Chloe is a viper, but at least she's interesting. Julian soaked it in. He was the victor. At 8:00 p.m. the arrivals were supposed to be finished. The doors were closing. Julian tapped a glass of champagne, ready to make his welcoming speech. And then it happened. First a sound, a low, penetrating vibration that wasn't music. It was a deep, rhythmic whump, whump, whump. It grew louder, rattling the priceless Egyptian artifacts. "What on earth is that?" Chloe snapped, clutching the sapphire. "Is someone landing on the roof?" "That's impossible," Julian said, frowning. "Airspace is restricted." The sound faded, replaced by a sudden commotion at the museum's entrance. The head of museum security, a man Julian had on his payroll, was speaking frantically into his earpiece, his face pale. "Mr. Vance, sir." "We have an unscheduled arrival," the guard stammered. "I don't care," Julian said. "No one else gets in. We're starting." "Sir, you don't understand. It's Astrius Global." Julian froze. Astrius Global. The hyper-reclusive trillion-dollar private equity firm, the one run by the phantom billionaire Sebastian Thorne, a man no one had seen in public in a decade. "They aren't on the list," Julian said, his voice suddenly weak. "They are now, sir." The great oak doors of the museum, which had been closed, were pulled open by two men in identical black suits with no visible insignia, but with the unmistakable bulk of professionals. They moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, creating a human corridor from the curb to the entrance. Outside, the press, who had been packing up, scrambled back, their cameras flashing in a frenzy. A motorcade of 3 black armored Maybachs sat idling their presence, sucking the air off the street. "Who is it?" Chloe demanded, rising on her tiptoes. "Is it Thorne?" The middle Maybach's door opened. A single, impossibly high-heeled shoe, a delicate spike of black lacquer, touched the pavement. A woman emerged. The crowd went utterly, profoundly silent. It was not a dress. It was a sculpture. A column of midnight blue Schiaparelli velvet, so dark it looked black, with a single breathtaking piece of gilded anatomy embroidered over the bodice, a human heart picked out in gold thread and ruby beads. Her chestnut hair, which Julian had only ever seen in a bun, was down-styled in glossy, impossibly expensive waves. But it was the jewelry that made Chloe Sterling gasp and physically recoil. Around the woman's neck was not a single heavy stone, but a delicate cascading waterfall of antique diamonds that could only be one thing. "The Orloff Cascade," whispered a society columnist, her voice trembling. "I thought that was in a vault in Geneva. I thought it was a myth." The woman turned and the light hit her face. Julian Vance's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. It was Alara. But it wasn't. This was not the mousy beige woman who had signed a paper 4 hours ago. This woman was terrifying. Her face was the same, but the presence? She was regal, cold, and utterly, lethally self-possessed. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the crowd. A hand reached out from the car. She took it. Stepping out behind her, looking less like a phantom and more like a king, was Sebastian Thorne. Gray-haired, impeccably dressed, and with eyes that had bought and sold small countries before breakfast. Thorne, the man who never left his Zurich compound. Thorne, who was now holding the hand of Julian Vance's discarded ex-wife. Thorne did not lead Alara. He gestured for her to precede him. He was her escort. The cameras exploded. The sound was deafening. Alara, a reporter, shrieked. "Who are you wearing, Mr. Thorne? Why are you here, Mrs. Vance? Mrs. Vance?" Alara ignored them. She ascended the steps, her posture perfect. She and Thorne moved through the stunned, frozen crowd who parted for them like the Red Sea. They reached the top of the stairs. Julian was white as a sheet, his mouth open. Chloe looked like she had been slapped. Ilara paused, one foot in front of the other. She looked at Julian. Her dark eyes swept over him from his shoes to his panicked face, then to Chloe, and finally to the Vance sapphire blazing on Chloe's chest. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was not a smile of warmth. It was a smile of pity. "Julian," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden silence. "You look surprised." Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned to the museum director standing beside him. "Directeur Girard," she said in flawless, unaccented Parisian French. "C'est un plaisir de vous revoir. Le temple est magnifique ce soir." "Director Girard, it is a pleasure to see you again. The temple is magnificent tonight." Director Girard, who had barely given Ilara the time of day for 6 years, bowed as if greeting royalty. "Madame Hayes," he replied, his voice thick with deference. "The honor is all ours. Your contribution to the new antiquities wing. We are speechless." Julian's blood went cold. Madame Hayes' contribution. Ilara turned back to Julian, her smile vanishing. She switched back to English. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice like Arctic ice. "A pleasure." She didn't introduce Sebastian Thorne. She didn't have to. She simply walked past him, past Chloe, and into the grand hall, leaving Julian Vance standing in a puddle of spilled champagne and shattered glass. The great hall was no longer Julian's party. It was Ilara's throne room. She didn't flit from group to group making small talk. She stood near the Temple of Dender, champagne flute in hand, and people came to her. Senators, tech moguls, old money matriarchs, people who had looked through her for 6 years, now approached her with a mixture of awe and terror. Julian watched paralyzed from across the room. Chloe was vibrating with fury beside him. "Who the hell is she?" Chloe hissed, her nails digging into Julian's arm. "What is this, some kind of stunt? Did she hire Sebastian Thorne? How did she get that dress? How did she get those diamonds? I don't know," Julian stammered. It was the truth. The woman he was looking at was a complete stranger. "What did Girard call her?" Chloe demanded. "Hayes. Her maiden name, Ilara Hayes. From Ohio." I think Julian said, his mind racing. "Her parents were teachers. They died. She was an orphan. She had a small trust fund. That's what she told me." "Ohio." Chloe said, her laugh like a shriek. "Darling, women from Ohio do not wear the Orloff Cascade. Women from Ohio do not get escorted by Sebastian Thorne. You didn't just divorce a librarian, Julian. You divorced something else." The buzz in the room was electric. The whispers were no longer about poor Ilara. They were about, who is Ilara? The jet. A Gulfstream G700. No, not a G700. The Astrius flagship. The one with the military-grade countermeasures. It flew from Zurich to Teterboro in under 6 hours. Thorne never travels. Never. Not for governments, not for kings. Look at the dress. That's custom Schiaparelli. That's not off the rack. Hayes. Hayes. Wait. Not Hayes as in Hayes. Oh my God. You don't mean the Van der Heyden family? A cold, greasy dread started to pool in Julian's stomach. He'd heard the name. Van der Heyden. A name whispered in the same breath as Rothschild or Rockefeller, but far, far quieter. Dutch. Old money. Shipping, banking, art, pharmaceuticals. A conglomerate so vast and so private it didn't even appear on public stock exchanges. It was impossible. Chloe, overhearing the whispers, had grabbed her phone. Her fingers were flying across the screen. "Julian," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "The Van der Heyden Holding Company, the primary family trust. It's managed by a firm in Zurich." So Julian snapped. "The firm is Astraeus Global Capital, Julian." That's a coincidence." The last matriarch of the Van der Heyden family, Chloe read her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. Helena van der Heyden. She married an English diplomat, a Mr. Hayes, to escape the family business in the 70s. They had one son who died in a car crash, along with his wife, leaving one single solitary heir. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the journals he'd thrown away, the unreadable cramped script. It was Dutch. One heir, Chloe continued, her voice trembling, who was sent to America to be educated at Columbia University under her mother's simplified name to protect her from the pressures of her inheritance. Chloe looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical. Her name was Elara Hayes. The room seemed to tilt. 6 years. 6 years of ordering her to fetch his coffee. 6 years of complaining about her boring dinners. 6 years of mocking her simple tastes, her lack of drive, her quaint art history degree. He had been married to one of the wealthiest women in the world, and he had just divorced her for nothing. He looked at the key he still had in his pocket. The key to the desk drawer. He hadn't thrown everything away. He'd kept the key. He'd thought. He didn't know what he'd thought. He looked at Elara. She was laughing. A light, airy laugh as she spoke with Senator Harrison. It was a laugh he had never ever heard. He had to talk to her. He had to fix this. He straightened his tuxedo, ignored Chloe's "Julian, don't," and began to walk across the room. He felt like he was walking through wet cement. Every eye was on him. He reached the small circle. The senator nodded at him curtly. Sebastian Thorne looked at him as if he were a speck of dust on his lapel. Elara turned. Her eyes were bright, amused. "Elara," Julian said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk, now." Elara tilted her head. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice polite, as if speaking to a stranger who had dialed a wrong number. "Have we been introduced?" "Elara?" "This isn't funny," Julian hissed, reaching for her arm. Before his fingers could even brush the velvet of her sleeve, Sebastian Thorne's hand clamped down on his wrist. It wasn't a violent grip, but the pressure was immediate and absolute. It was the grip of a man who could crush bone and not spill his drink. Mr. Vance Thorne said, his voice a soft, chilling baritone. "I believe the lady is occupied, and you are interrupting." Julian snatched his hand back, rubbing his wrist. The humiliation was a physical burning heat on his neck. I am the host of this event," Julian stammered. "Are you?" Elara said, taking a sip of her champagne. "I was under the impression this was a fundraiser for the hospital, and a very successful one at that." She turned back to the senator. "Now, Senator, you were telling me about the new infrastructure bill." She had dismissed him, like he was a waiter. Julian stood there frozen for a full 10 seconds before he realized he had to move. He retreated, walking backward at first before turning and stalking back to Chloe. This is a nightmare," he muttered. "It's not a nightmare, Julian," Chloe said. She was no longer furious. She was calculating. She was looking at Julian, but she was seeing his balance sheet. And for the first time she was comparing it to Elara's. "We have to do something," Julian said. "You have to do something," Chloe corrected. "You have to make your speech. You have to save this. You have to get up on that stage and remind all these people who you are." She was right. The auction. The pediatric wing. That was his power. He would get up on that stage, he would pledge his family's money, and he would reclaim his night. He strode to the stage, grabbing the microphone from the stunned MC. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice artificially loud. "Welcome, welcome to the Heart Ball." A smattering of polite, distracted applause. All eyes were still on Elara. "We are here tonight for one reason, to save lives, to build the future, to fund the new Vance Foundation Pediatric Cardiology Wing." He had their attention now. This was his territory. "And to kick off the auction tonight," he said, pulling himself up to his full height, "I am proud to announce the Vance family's opening pledge. We are starting the bidding for the naming rights. At $5 million. The room gasped. It was a strong, powerful open. Julian smiled, feeling the power flood back into him. He looked right at Alara. "Top that, you little—" The auctioneer, a portly man named Mr. Albright, took the stage. $5 million from Mr. Vance. "Do I hear 6? Do I hear 6? A rival pharmaceutical CEO raised his paddle. $6 million. $6 million. Albright cried. "Do I hear 7? Julian raised his paddle. $7 million? This was his night. $7 million. A wonderful, wonderful. He was cut off. Alara hadn't raised a paddle. She hadn't even looked at the stage. She simply raised a single delicate finger to her temple as if bored. Her escort, Sebastian Thorne, spoke, his voice not loud, but it carried through the hall as if amplified. 10 million. The room went dead silent. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. 10 million. It was a bold, foolish move, a theatrical gesture to embarrass him. $10 million, the auctioneer Albright boomed, his face flushed with excitement. "The bid is with Mr. Thorne. Do I hear 11? Julian looked at his father, who was sitting at the family table. The elder Mr. Vance looked pale, but he gave a sharp, angry nod. This was their name. They could not be outbid at their own event. 11 million, Julian shouted, his voice cracking slightly. The room, which had been silent, erupted in murmurs. This was no longer charity. It was a duel. Alara hadn't moved. She was still in conversation with the senator, as if the bidding was nothing more than background noise. Thorne waited for the chatter to die. He took a small sip of water. Then he spoke again, his voice flat and devastating. 15 million. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Julian's blood ran cold. 15 million was not a pledge. It was a weapon. That was a significant portion of his family's liquid capital. To pledge it would mean selling stocks, leveraging assets. It was reckless. Julian, stop. Chloe whispered, her hand a claw on his tuxedo sleeve. Don't. It's not worth it. She could see the shift. Power was moving across the room like a cold front. But Julian couldn't stop. His pride, his name, his entire world was on that stage. He had to win. Mr. Vance, the auctioneer, prodded, his eyes gleaming. 15 million is the bid. Julian looked at his father again. His father shook his head, a tiny defeated motion. It's too much. Julian felt sick. He was going to lose. He was going to be humiliated by his mousy ex-wife in front of all of New York. Going once. Albright sang, going twice. Julian looked at Alara. She was watching him now. Her expression was completely neutral, as if she were waiting for a bus. That neutrality was worse than any smirk. It meant this was nothing to her. 16 million, Julian heard himself yell. The room fell silent again. Julian was panting, his knuckles white on his paddle. He'd done it. He'd crossed the line. His father looked apoplectic. But it was done. He'd called her bluff. There was no way she would. Alara finally turned her full attention to the stage. She picked up her own champagne flute and looked not at Julian, but at the auctioneer. She didn't raise a paddle. She didn't speak to Thorne. She spoke herself, her voice perfectly clear, aided by the microphone Julian had left on. 25 million, she said. It was not a bid. It was an execution. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. $25 million. It was an amount so vast, so far beyond the scope of the auction, that it was absurd. It was a joke. But the look on her face and the grim finality in Sebastian Thorne's eyes told everyone it was not. Julian Vance physically staggered. He grabbed the podium to steady himself. 25, the auctioneer stammered, his professional glee replaced by sheer shock. Madam Hayes, did you say $25 million I did, Alara said calmly. Is there a problem? Is the bid not accepted? No, of course it's accepted, Albright said, wiping his brow. $25 million is the bid. Mr. Vance. All eyes turned to Julian. He was gray. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He had been so proud of his $5 million. She had just octupled his family's entire legacy without even blinking. She had just bought his passion project out from under him like she was buying a new pair of shoes. He gave a tiny strangled shake of his head. Sold. Albright slammed his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. For $25 million to Madame Alara Hayes. The room exploded. Not in applause, but in a chaotic roar of disbelief, shock, and frantic conversation. Alara, meanwhile, looked bored. She set her champagne flute down and, flanked by Thorne, began to walk toward the stage. The crowd parted for her. She ascended the small steps and took the microphone from the stunned auctioneer. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping over them before landing finally on Julian. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing through the grand hall. "The Vance family has done a wonderful job stewarding this foundation for many years. Their generosity has been noted." It was a perfectly crafted insult, a verbal stiletto. "My family," she continued, "the Vanderheyden family has always believed that philanthropy, like breathing, should be essential and quiet. We have for generations funded research and built hospitals anonymously. But tonight I was moved by Mr. Vance's passion, moved to step out of the shadows." She gave Julian a small, cold smile. "I am so pleased to fund this new wing. It will, I am sure, save countless lives. And I am especially proud to announce its new name." This was it, the final twist of the knife. "In honor of the woman who taught me that true strength is never loud, the new wing will be christened the Helena Hayes Pediatric Cardiology Center." She had erased him. In his own home at his own party, she had taken his family's name off his greatest achievement and replaced it with her grandmother's. She placed the microphone back on the stand. She didn't look at Julian again. She and Thorne walked off the stage, not back to their table, but straight toward the main exit. They hadn't come for the party. They hadn't come for the dinner. They had come to win. As they reached the door, Julian, spurred by a final desperate surge of adrenaline, ran after them. "Alara! Why?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "After 6 years? Why are you doing this to me?" Alara stopped in the grand entryway. The press, now a frenzied mob, was held back by her security team, their cameras flashing. She turned to face him one last time. The entire gala was watching. "Doing what to you, Julian?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious. "I just donated $25 million to a children's hospital." "You should be thanking me. You did this to humiliate me." "No," Alara said, and her voice dropped, becoming so soft he had to lean in to hear it. The coldness in her eyes was now absolute. "You humiliated yourself. You just didn't know it until tonight." "But I loved you," he whispered. It felt like a lie even as he said it. "No, Julian," she corrected just as softly. "You loved that I was quiet. You loved that I was uncomplicated. You loved that I made you feel big." She gestured back to the hall. This was just business, a simple transaction. You see, I knew you'd leverage the company to make your legacy bid. I knew you'd overextend. You're predictable." What are you talking about?" "The bid wasn't the revenge," Julian Sebastian Thorne said, speaking for the first time. He handed a slim, leather-bound folder to one of his aides, who in turn handed it to Julian. "This is—" Julian opened it. It was a single-page press release embargoed for 900 a.m. the next morning. For immediate release. Astraeus Global Capital announces hostile takeover bid for Vance Pharma. Julian's vision went white at the edges. What he whispered. Vance Pharma, Alara said, her voice breezy as if discussing the weather. My family's holding company VDH owns the primary patents on the 3 cardiovascular drugs that make up 90% of your company's revenue. We leased them to your father in 1998. Julian's mind flashed to the quaint art history degree, the trips to the library, the boring ledgers she was always studying. You knew our books? I wrote your books, Julian, she said. For 6 years I've watched you and your father mismanage the company, leveraging it for things like this. She gestured to the party. All that debt, all that hubris. It made you a very, very attractive target. You can't, he stammered. Our board. Our shareholders. Your shareholders will be delighted, Thorne interrupted. We're offering them a 40% premium. They will vote you out by breakfast. Your father will be retired by lunch. You will be redundant. This was the true execution. The gala was just the stage. Ilara looked at him, her gaze lingering on the man she had once somehow loved, the man who had called her a fool that very afternoon. You wanted to know where I was going, Julian, she said. I was going to a board meeting. My board meeting. She leaned in, her voice a poisoned dart. And I'm keeping the sapphire. Chloe can have the replica you bought her. The real one has been in my family's vault in Geneva for 2 years. The one she is wearing is a very, very good fake from Cartier. A costume, as I believe I called it. Chloe, who had crept up behind Julian, let out a small, strangled sound. Ilara smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. It was the most terrifying thing Julian had ever seen. I wish you the life you deserve, Julian. She turned, stepped into the waiting Maybach, and vanished into the New York night. Julian was left standing on the steps of the museum holding a press release that announced the end of his entire world. The sun rose on Tuesday morning over a New York City that was feeding on the carcass of Julian Vance. The New York Post cover was a gleeful, full-page photo of Ilara in her Schiaparelli gown, side by side with a blurry, slack-jawed image of Julian. The headline, "The Wife and the Knife. Divorced him at 3 p.m., bought him by 9 p.m. Forbes had already published a 5,000-word deep dive, The Quiet Heiress. How Ilara Hayes van der Heyden, the ghost of VDH, just stepped into the light. It was all there. The van der Heyden lineage. The VDH conglomerate with assets estimated in the high hundreds of billions. The privacy vow taken by the family. The quiet 6-year sabbatical of its primary heir. Julian hadn't slept. He was in his father's penthouse office at the Vance Pharma building, the one he was supposed to inherit. His father, a man he had always seen as a titan, was sitting in his leather chair looking small and gray. The patents, his father kept muttering, staring at the ticker on his screen. She knew. She knew the renewal clauses. She said she wrote our books. Julian asked, his voice dead. She had an art history degree. His father roared, suddenly finding his voice. That's what you told us. She was just Ilara. She planned the Christmas party. The VDH pharmaceutical arm, Julian read from the Forbes article, controls the patent portfolios for... He named the 3 drugs. Their entire company. The leases are set to expire in 60 days. VDH has notified Vance Pharma of its intent not to renew. This makes the company's valuation effectively zero, save for its physical assets. The Astrius bid. It's not a takeover, his father whispered, the realization dawning. It's a liquidation. They're not offering a 40% premium. They're offering 40% of yesterday's value. It's a rescue package. They're just taking it. The phone on the desk rang. It was the board chairman. Arthur. You have to fight this. Julian's father yelled into the receiver. There was a long pause. I see, his father said, his voice collapsing. Yes. The entire board. I see. Yes, the severance package. Thank you, Arthur. You snake. He hung up the phone. They're taking it. The board has unanimously accepted the Astraeus offer. We're out. They're exercising the moral turpitude clause in our contracts based on what Julian demanded. On you, his father spat. On your affair with Chloe. On the public humiliation. On bringing the company into disrepute. We're being fired. For cause. No golden parachute, no severance. Julian's legs gave out. He sank into a guest chair. Fired. From his own company. The phone rang again. It was Chloe. Julian looked at the screen and let it ring. What about the house? Julian whispered. The penthouse. The Hamptons estate. Leveraged, his father said, his voice a ghost. All of it. Leveraged against the company's stock. The stock that as of 9:30 a.m. will be worthless. We don't own them, Julian. The banks do. And Estrellas, she just bought the banks. They were ruined. Not just less wealthy. Not newly modest. They were ruined. Julian thought of the small insulting settlement he had offered Alara. The lifeline. The severance. He had called her a fool. A knock came at the office door. A young, nervous-looking woman from legal services came in holding a simple brown envelope. Mr. Vance, she said, looking at Julian. This was just messengered over. From Estrellas Global. Julian ripped it open. It wasn't a legal document. It was a check. A personal check drawn from a private bank in Zurich. It was for the exact amount he had offered Alara in the lawyer's office. The generous severance. Attached was a small embossed note card. Don't be a fool, Julian. Take the money. You'll be fine. E.H. It was the most devastating, complete, and total destruction he could have ever imagined. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet. It was precise. It was her. He looked at the key he still had. The key to the desk drawer. The one he'd forgotten about in the chaos. He ran from the office, ignoring his father's calls, and took the private elevator down to his penthouse. He ran to the library, to the simple desk Alara had always used. He jammed the key into the lock. He had been wrong. The drawer wasn't empty. Inside was a single object. A small black velvet-covered box. He opened it. It was the Vance sapphire. The real one. The 60-carat flawless, priceless heirloom. She hadn't taken it to Geneva. She hadn't stolen it. She had left it for him. He stared at it, completely broken. Why? Why leave this? And then he understood. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. The stone was priceless, yes. But it was now the only thing he had. He would have to sell it. He would have to sell his family's name, his legacy, just to survive. She hadn't just taken his company. She had left him with the burden of liquidating his own history. The final, perfect, quiet revenge. While Julian Vance was staring into the heart of a sapphire, Alara Hayes was 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, heading east. The cabin of the Gulfstream G700 was not a party. It was an office. The plush cream leather seats were covered in financial binders and market projections. Alara, having swapped her Schiaparelli gown for a simple black cashmere suit, was sipping black coffee and running a global board meeting via a secure teleconference. "The Vance acquisition is complete, Madam Hayes," a voice reported from the screen. "The assets are being folded into the VDH Pharma division. We project a 20% efficiency increase within 6 months just by eliminating their redundancies." "Good, Alara," said her voice crisp. "Henrik, what is the status of the former executives? Mr. Vance Sr. has been forcibly retired. Mr. Vance Jr. has been terminated. Their assets are frozen pending the bank's recovery. As you predicted, they leveraged everything." And the fake sapphire Sebastian Thorne, sitting opposite her, permitted himself a small smile. Ms. Sterling attempted to have it appraised this morning at Cartier. They politely informed her it was one of their own high jewelry replicas ordered and paid for by a private client 2 years ago. They also informed her that attempting to sell a branded replica is a federal crime. She left, quickly, without the stone. Alara nodded. "A loose end. Julian will find the real one. He will sell it. It will be public. It will be the final nail in the Vance society coffin. It's cleaner that way. Thorne, who had served her father and grandfather, looked at her with profound respect. Your father was a good man, Ilara, but he was soft. Your grandfather was a shark, but you are a surgeon. That was exquisite. Ilara looked out the window at the endless blue. It wasn't exquisite, Sebastian, she said quietly. It was necessary. For 6 years, I hibernated. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be loved for me, the simple me. And were you? He asked gently. I was loved for as long as I was convenient, Ilara said. Julian didn't fall out of love with me. He just stopped seeing me. I became furniture. His ambition was a cancer. It consumed his kindness, his humor, everything I thought I'd married. And when he flaunted that child in public, he wasn't just disrespecting me. He was disrespecting my family. He was threatening the vow of privacy. He made us vulnerable. And that, she said, her eyes hardening, was his real mistake. He never knew who you were, Thorne said. He never asked. Ilara replied. He never once in 6 years asked about my family, my childhood, or my language. He just talked about his deals, his ambitions, his legacy. She closed the binder in front of her. He wanted a legacy. Now he has one. He'll be remembered as the man who had the world in his hands and threw it away for a cheap copy. The jet began its smooth descent toward Switzerland. So Madam Chairman Thorne said, his voice becoming formal again. What is the first order of business when we land in Zurich? Ilara looked at her schedule. Item 1, the Vance Pharma liquidation. Item 2, review the South American lithium mine acquisition. Item 3. She smiled a small private smile. We're having the Helena Hayes Pediatric Center designed by Kengo Kuma. I have a 200 p.m. call with his office in Tokyo. She had stepped out of the shadows. But she wasn't a socialite. She wasn't a gala-goer. She was an empress, and she was home. 6 months later. The name Vance was a whisper in New York, a cautionary tale. Julian, it was rumored, was living in a small rented condo in New Jersey. He had sold the sapphire in a humiliating private auction fire sale. Chloe Sterling had vanished, last seen on Instagram in Dubai, attached to a new, equally shiny Billionaire. The Vance Pharma building was now the VDH North American headquarters. A letter arrived at Julian's condo. It was on heavy cream-colored cardstock. It was an invitation. You are cordially invited to the opening dedication of the Helena Hayes Pediatric Cardiology Center. Julian stared at it. Was this a final cruelty? A taunt? He went. He had to. He wore his last good suit, the one he'd been married in. He stood in the back of the gleaming new glass and wood atrium, a ghost at the feast. He saw her. She was on the podium, surrounded by doctors, politicians, and smiling children. She looked happy. Not the cold, avenging angel from the Met. Not the mousy, beige wife from his old life. Just content. She was radiant. She gave a speech not about money, but about her grandmother Helena, about her passion for medicine. Julian watched, and for the first time he felt not anger, not humiliation, but a profound, bottomless sense of loss. He hadn't just lost his money. He had lost her. He had held a star in his hand and complained it wasn't a light bulb. After the ceremony, as she was leaving, she saw him. He was frozen, waiting for security to remove him. But she stopped. She walked over to him, her security detail fanning out. Julian, she said. Her voice was warm. Ilara, he said, his voice thick. It's beautiful. What you've built. We built, she corrected him gently. It was your family's foundation that started it. The name is just a name. The work is what matters. He didn't know what to say. I'm sorry felt like swallowing sand. I miss you was a lie. I ruined myself was the truth. Why, he finally asked. Why did you invite me? Alara looked at him, her eyes clear. Because I'm finished, Julian. The anger, the business. It's all done. I'm not that person anymore. And I don't want you to be either. I don't want to be your villain. I just want to be Alara. She held out her hand. The money from the sapphire. I know you got it. I hope you use it. To start over. To be better. Julian looked at her hand. He couldn't take it. You won, he whispered. You won everything. Ilara's smile was sad. If you still think this was a game, Julian, then you've learned nothing at all. She retracted her hand. Goodbye, Mr. Vance. She turned and walked away. He watched her go, stepping into a simple, elegant black Audi, not a Maybach. She drove away, disappearing into the city traffic, just another person. Julian stood alone in the atrium of the hospital wing that should have borne his name. He was right. She had won. She had won her name, her power, her company, and her legacy. But more than that, she had won her freedom. She had taken back her own life. He was the one left signing the papers in a quiet room with nothing. He was the one who was invisible. And he finally truly understood the life he deserved. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her identity. Alara Hayes teaches us that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She wasn't just a scorned ex-wife. She was a sleeping giant, and her husband's cruelty was the alarm clock that woke her up. She didn't just take his company. She took back her name. She proved that true power isn't about being the loudest, but about knowing the value of your own signature. What did you think of Ilara's ultimate revenge? Was it too cold, or was it perfectly calculated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story took a long time to tell, and if you enjoyed it, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good comeback story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic storytelling every single week. Click that bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.